What is sound? No, really. What is it? Is sound music? Okay, sometimes, right? But what is music made out of? Notes, right? Okay, sure. Yeah, and a note is a fundamental frequency that's played according to a scale that we made up. But if we just play that single frequency, it sounds like this. Not like this, or this, or even this. So what's all that other stuff? If we look at this sound in an EQ, we can see these little spikes. And if we look at this in something that examines the spectral content of a sound, we can see these spikes as bright lines. Those bright lines are harmonics or sidebands, and I thought I understood how these made up sound, but it turns out the entire thing is much weirder and cooler than I thought. That's where we will eventually get in this video. A video on the history and technique of spectral synthesis, a journey to the very heart of what makes things sound the way that they do. Hi, my name is Jeremy, this is Red Means Recording, and today we're going to look at what led to the modern implementation of spectral synthesis, a technique that breaks apart sound into discrete components and lets us stretch, warp, and reconstitute the sound in different ways. We'll also look at Xstream, a free spectral software instrument from the video's sponsor, Steinberg. They approached me to make presets and a video on the software, and I decided to turn it into more than just a software demo. I wanted to know how this whole thing worked, and now I hope to help you learn too. So, let's get started. We mentioned fundamental frequencies in our intro. That's the root frequency of a note, what you would play as a key on your keyboard when you play a note. If we play a simple sine wave, we get a pure expression of that frequency as a smooth, sinusoidal shape with no bumpies or kinks, just a smooth, null friend. But that's not how any sound appears in nature, and even as far back as the 1730s, scientists could tell something weird was going on. If you look at a vibrating string, you can see that it has a much more complex vibrational pattern than a simple sine wave. This got a guy named Daniel Bernoulli interested, and his work on the modal decomposition of vibrating strings dug into it. If you look at a guitar pluck in an EQ or a spectral analyzer, you'll see peaks above the fundamental. Each one of those is a harmonic, or sideband, and these harmonics follow a certain pattern called the harmonic series. Andrew Huang has a great video on the harmonic series you can find on YouTube if you're interested. So each one of these harmonics has to exist for a sound to sound the way that it does. When you put them all together, you get a much more complex waveform than a simple sine wave, but if you isolate them individually, you get sines. Bernoulli figured out that each one of these individual harmonics has its own equation, and you can deconstruct a complex wave into a series of simpler ones using math. Each one of these individual bits Daniel called a mode, and this is the foundation of everything going forward. It was in 1822 that we got a mathematical foundation for this, thanks to Joseph Fourier. His theorem provided a way to represent periodic signals as a sum of sinusoids. Sinusoids is such a word. I know it means sine wave, but it's so much cooler to say sinusoids. Fourier proved that no matter how complex the original signal was, it could be broken down into a collection of discrete sine waves, each with their own amplitude and frequency. He also proved that this could go both ways, that once you've decompiled a signal into individual bits, you could also recompile it into its original signal with math. Notice that I'm not saying sound here, just signal. That's because Fourier transform, as this technique is known, applies to way more than just sound. It's useful for understanding all sorts of wave patterns in science and engineering, like sound waves, light waves, or even the vibrations of structures like bridges and buildings. A breakthrough that had everything to do with sound in this field came in 1863 from German polymath Hermann von Helmholtz. He figured out how to decompile sound in real time for the human ear using what's known as a Helmholtz resonator. This weird-looking thing was made to be put directly in the ear, and it was designed in such a way that only one frequency would pass through at a time. Sort of like what happens when you blow across a bottle, but without all the fancy, breathy harmonics. If you were to listen to a band with these things on, the sound would go from hearing the whole band to hearing only the frequency resonated by the device, and an amplitude fluctuating as that frequency was accessed by the sound the band was creating. Okay, so I wanted to come up with a way to play for you what these Helmholtz resonators might have been like if you were experiencing them yourself. I have this loop here that is playing through an EQ. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable 3 bandpass filters all tuned to the same frequency with a very, 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 very narrow focus. And you're going to notice 2 things. One, we start to lose a lot of frequency information, sonic information, but we start to gain perception of that single frequency. Here's band 1. You'll notice on the scope that things went from complex to very sinusoidal, and this is going to happen even more so once I enable band 2. Now you'll notice that 1, this sounds really annoying, but 2, we are almost completely sinusoidal on the right, and you really only perceive one frequency, the frequency that the bandpass is tuned to. Here's 3. And here we are again, just completely one tone with amplitude fluctuation. So this proves that sound, as I move this frequency here, you're going to get a similar thing going on where it's a sine wave fluctuating at different amplitudes. And there are phase aspects going on here, and we'll talk about those later. But for the most part, sound can be broken down into these sine waves, fluctuating at phase and amplitude. So I thought that was kind of cool. There were a few early electronic instruments that started working with the concept of sound as a collection of modes or partials. The telharmonium in 1898 and Hammond organ in 1934 were early electromechanical instruments that performed a form of additive synthesis by combining multiple sine wave components. The telharmonium synthesized musical tones by mechanically generating high-voltage alternating currents of the required frequencies using rotating tone wheels and alternators. This was an early form of additive synthesis where complex tones were built up by combining multiple pure sine wave components. Each alternator consisted of a toothed iron wheel rotating in front of an electromagnet, producing an alternating current with a frequency proportional to the rotational speed and the number of teeth. The instrument had a total of 145 alternators, with each one generating a specific tone or frequency. This allowed it to produce multiple notes simultaneously. The alternators themselves were arranged on a series of 8 shafts spanning 60 feet, driven by a large motor and a system of gears. Musicians played the telharmonium using a console with 153 keys and pedals, which controlled a complex array of switches and circuits to route the desired tones from the alternators. The electrical tones generated were then transmitted over telephone lines to be received and converted into sound waves by speakers or telephone receivers in remote locations. The Hammond organ used drawbars to mix the fundamental with upper and lower harmonics at a user's choice of amplitude, allowing a player to create brighter or bassier tones on the fly. And this is a basic implementation of additive synthesis. The vocoder, introduced in 1935, and the voder in 1937, were early speech analysis synthesis systems that modeled the spectral characteristics of the human voice tract. The original vocoder, invented by Homer Dudley at Bell Labs in 1928, was designed for secure voice communications over telephone lines by encoding speech into a compressed signal that could be transmitted over narrower bandwidths. It consisted of an analyzer that broke down speech into its frequency components, and a synthesizer that reconstructed an artificial voice from these components. The analyzer used bandpass filters to separate the speech spectrum into different frequency bands, while the synthesizer combined noise and tone generators to resynthesize the voice. I'd like to connect the vocoder, an effect that we might associate with very specific sounds like making computer voices and stuff like that, back to the other concepts we've talked about so far, like bandpass filters, filter banks, the Helmholtz resonators. So here you can hear the sound, this wonderful loop we have here, and I have a vocoder here, and I'm going to start turning up the dry-wet. So right now, this vocoder is only using 4 filter bands, and those bands have a range of 80 hertz to 12 kilohertz. If I was to isolate one of these bands, you would hear something that's not dissimilar to what we did earlier with the Helmholtz resonator concept, where it basically becomes a single band with a sinusoidal output. If I was to make this range even more specific, and there we go. A vocoder has now become a fixed filter bank with a single frequency, and all we're now getting out of it is amplitude. Because our range is so small here, these 4 filters really don't have much to work with until I spread them out again, and they can represent more of the sound. Let me go ahead and increase the amount of frequency bands here to, let's say, 32. And we'll notice that we get a different timbre because now we have a lot more bands to represent our information. This BW here is for the bandwidth of each one of these bands. So if I decrease that, then they become much more isolated and you get a more synthetic sound. And of course, I can go in there and isolate specific bands and return to that sort of sinusoidal concept. So that's how a vocoder is like a Helmholtz resonator and also just resonation in general and bandpass filters. In 1966, we got the phase vocoder, and this is where things get super weird, at least for me. It's also where my ability to properly articulate the math concepts here kind of go out the window, so apologies up front to any math wizards or FFT nerds watching the video. The phase vocoder, introduced in 1966, enabled more flexible spectral analysis and resynthesis of audio signals. It was first described by J. L. Flanagan and R. M. Golden at Bell Labs in 1966. It analyzes an audio signal by breaking it down into overlapping short-term frames using the short-time Fourier transform, or STFT. For each frame, it extracts the amplitude and phase information of the different frequency components, called bins. To modify the timescale or pitch, the phase vocoder manipulates the phase and/or spacing between successive frames during resynthesis. The phase vocoder allows independent control over time and pitch modification by separating the processing of amplitude and phases. So reading this got me thinking, what the heck does phase have to do with anything? Up until this point, I understood sound as a collection of partials with different amplitudes over time, some harmonic, some inharmonic. That made sense. What did phase have to do with anything? And what the heck even is phase inside of a sound? When it comes to waveforms, phase indicates a point in time within a sound's wave cycle. It's measured in degrees, with 0 degrees being the start of the wave, 90 degrees the peak, 180 degrees the midpoint, 270 degrees the trough, and 360 degrees completing the cycle. Any point in a repeating wave has a phase value, and when you combine waves at different phases, weird things can happen. For instance, two identical waves, 180 degrees out of phase, completely negate each other, as shown here. What I didn't understand, and I needed big smart man Venus theory to help me out with, shout out to Cameron, was that to get even a simple waveform like a saw wave, the harmonics above the fundamental are actually out of phase with each other in a set way, purposefully causing specific phase relationships that lead to the edges of the saw wave. This was absolutely wild to me and helped me understand why a phase vocoder captures phase of each partial. It's intrinsic to the way sound itself is produced. Additive synthesis techniques were explored in computer music starting in the late 1960s. Software like Music V provided banks of oscillators that could generate and sum multiple sine wave components to produce complex tones through additive synthesis. This allowed composers like Jean-Claude Risset to specify the frequencies, amplitudes, and envelopes of the individual partials to create time-varying synthetic timbres, as he did with his groundbreaking work on analyzing and resynthesizing trumpet tones in 1964. During the 70s and 80s, advancements were made in sinusoidal modeling, which breaks down complex sounds into their individual sine wave components known as partials, which could be reconstructed with additive synthesis techniques to create an approximation of the original sound. But it still struggled with the noisy and transient aspects of audio. That was until the sines plus noise plus transients model developed by Xavier Rodet and others at IRCAM, a French institute dedicated to the research of music and sound, especially in the fields of avant-garde and electroacoustic art music. The sines plus transients plus noise model, or STN model, developed by Xavier Rodet and others at IRCAM, is a way to represent audio signals by breaking them down into three main components. The first is sines, or sinusoids. We've talked about these. These are the time-varying sinusoidal components that model the tonal or pitched parts of the sound. The next is transients. These are short bursts or impulses that represent the attack portions of sound, like the initial strike of a drum or pluck of a string. Transients capture the abrupt changes in the waveform. The third and final is noise, and this is the remaining broadband residual after the sinusoidal and transient components are extracted. It models the non-tonal stochastic parts of the sound, like breathiness or frication noise. The separate components allow transformation like time stretching the sines, preserving transients, and filtering the noise residuals. It also enables high-quality resynthesis by recombining the modified sines, transients, and noise components. You can see this technology in wavetable synthesizers like the PPG Wave, Groove Synthesis Third Wave, and Nobula Pianophonic, where wavetables represent the morphing sinusoidal part, and PCM samples or a specific second wavetable is made to use to represent the inharmonic transients. So there it is, the basis for spectral synthesis. Scientists found that complex wave patterns could be broken down into smaller, simpler sine wave components known as modes or partials. And by analyzing these separately and combining them, we were able to recreate complex waveforms. Later, other scientists focusing specifically on the audio aspect of this Fourier transformation technique realized that sound was more complex than just sine waves smushed together, and developed an addition to the concept that accounted for the transient and noise information inherent in complex real-world sounds. The combination of all these techniques is where we find ourselves today, with software tools at our disposal that would honestly make Fourier blush. I find the implementation of spectral synthesis is a lot like the implementation of granular synthesis, in that it's a very simple concept that has a big range of how it's implemented in practice. With that said, let's check out Xstream. Okay, well here we are in Halion and Xstream. I'm not going to explain how to get this installed. Please check the video description for links on that. It is free. Don't worry about that. So in order to get started, we want to get a sample in this area right here in the middle, and we can record and put something in there right now. So I'm going to record a very simple piano bit, and we're going to put it in here. Now, if I play back a note on C3, we will hear what's going on. There it is. You can see our notes. You can see every time we hit a note on the piano. Isn't that beautiful? I'm going to turn the speed up. This will go through it faster. Once we get to the end here, you'll notice that it's going to loop backwards, and that's from our loop mode right here. Our loop modes can be forward and backwards, which is alternate, on, or off, which is really, really great. Our speed control here, we'll choose how fast we move through, with noon being about the normal playback time. Our position, we'll choose where we start in the whole thing. And then spread, we'll create another playhead and we'll move through at the same time. Now, this is sounding pretty aggressive right now, and that's because our blur time and our blur depth are both down quite a bit right now. So let's turn up blur time as this plays back, and you're going to hear it spread out and start creating those beautiful soundscape things that this program is sort of designed to do. And then blur depth. Turn the speed down. One of the things that spectral synthesis is really good at is time stretching. So now we get this kind of ghostly, you can obviously hear pitch, but it's very ghostly and kind of, I don't know, spectral in a way. Spectral ghosts, haha. The direct button here will increase attack time as you increase blur time, which means that the longer you set the blur time, the more slowly the sound fades in, which I think is actually good for this. Then blur depth, this determines the amount of frequency smearing. So you're going to hear it get kind of warbly as we turn that up. We want it somewhere around there. Purity, to the right of that, allows us to adjust the spectral purity of the sound. This increases the level difference between partials, which results in a sort of pure sound. Once we get over here, it starts to become almost all sine waves, which is kind of interesting. We'll get back to that. Let's leave it right up in the middle right here. Inharmonicity, to the right of that, scales the frequency offsets of all the partials. You can get some really, really nasty results with that one. Auto gain, because we are sort of creating a lot of variations in the original sound, auto gain will auto gain the different sections of the sound as it creates them. And then width, if you have spread on, these two playheads will get spread left and right, as you heard them. And you can have them right in the center. Let's try a different sample. To the right of that, we have a cool thing called stack. And what this is going to do, because Extreme is monophonic, meaning you can't play chords with this, only one note at a time, this is going to allow you to stack different intervals on top. And I'll show you a really fun thing that I like to do with this once we get down to the LFOs. Let's go ahead and turn all these down. And you'll hear that once we do that, we don't have any sound. And that's because this 0, 0, 1 here, we can change this to any interval we want, but this is our normal interval. And then we have like an octave, a seventh, and then some octaves down. Now I can change this to whatever I want. I can have this be spooky, so I could change this to 13, and then this would be negative, I don't know, 8. So this is where things start to get a little creepy. This thing is not just good for beautiful soundscapes. It's actually really good for weird and creepy things as well. You can repitch any of the sounds as they come through, and you can have them key follow to play chromatically. And there's also an envelope associated with that. If you click on these little purple parts right here, you're going to get into the place where you can draw their envelope and affect some of their parameters. If I click up to the top here, I will actually get into the spectral filter, and I can start to make some adjustments to what it thinks of as the spectral content if I want to. Now, the filter is cool because not only does it have our normal low pass types, but we also have band pass, high pass, band reject, so we can actually get sort of a phaser sound out of here, and then all pass. And both the band reject and all pass have variations of things that include like high pass and low pass with them, which is really cool. And below that, we have a distortion. So for this sound that we have here, that's very like almost sinusoidal, we're going to go ahead and like turn on maybe the bit red, and then turn this up. And we'll get that pretty cool aliasing there. Go to rate red. Get some classic sample rate reduction there. And there is an envelope for this as well. To the right of that, we have a full amp right here, and then a pan. Those are the basic controls. And, you know, each one, again, you can come in here and set an envelope for them. I think it's like a multi-stage envelope, which is really cool. So while we only have a few LFOs and stuff down here, if we look at this, we'll be able to switch to like loop, one shot, or shaper mode. And then you can have these be a repeating multi-stage envelope, which is really great. Let's go ahead and now play around with a sort of simpler sound, and we'll start using the LFOs to do some interesting things. Cool. Okay, so we have a couple LFOs down here, and what I'm going to do is something that I've been doing from my presets that I made for this quite a bit, and I'm going to use these LFOs first and foremost on the stack. So I'm going to go ahead and grab LFO 1 and put it on our main pitch right here, our main pitch. So now what's going to happen is I turn this depth up. We're going to see this little thing go up and down. Go ahead and turn the frequency of this up. This can be synced or unsynced. Right now it's in unsynced mode. And you'll notice that this is now going up and down from the point that we set this here. If I want that to only be unipolar, I can go over to our mod matrix here and click the little button that says unipolar, bipolar. You'll notice there's a whole bunch of cool stuff here in the mod matrix. I'll let you explore that on your own. But yeah, you can make it unipolar or bipolar. So for instance, if I wanted to put this all the way on the bottom here and make this unipolar, that would be an option too. And yeah, you'll notice that we're going to get a not dissimilar effect where it's going to kind of go out, disappear like that. Now, the reason I want to do that is because I'm going to do something that I do in modular quite a bit. And I want to use LFOs to bring in different intervals of this sound and then have this whole thing sort of like fade in and out of different timbre vibes and harmonic vibes from that process. So I'm going to go ahead and make this bipolar again. LFO 2, let's go ahead and just drag this onto our octave up like this. Go ahead and put this in the middle. I'm going to phase shift this LFO, and I'm going to turn the frequency up a bit, and then I will go ahead and turn this down. Already getting some just really beautiful results. Yeah, that growl there, that was really nice. Let's do that. So we'll bring in this growl here every once in a while. I'm going to go over to this next LFO section here. XLFOY. This is cool because every time division that you can see here can have its own shape. So you can do some pretty wild stuff switching between time values and LFO values at the same time. I think it's pretty cool. So I'm going to grab XLFO here and put it on our octave and turn this up. So that'll bring in our octave down now and then. That's cool. Oh, I like that. I'm going to grab the Y LFO here and have it attached to Purity. Turn this down so it doesn't go quite as far. Okay, so what I want to do now is play some of the presets that I've made. I'm going to go ahead and play the original sound, and then I'll play what it ended up as. All right, so now I'm just going to play you a couple more of the presets, not with the original sound. So as you can hear, Extreme is really, really good, as like Steinberg says, taking sort of normal samples and turning them into big, long, sweeping soundscapes. And I think it's really, really cool. If spectral synthesis in this form is going to succeed at anything, it's going to be this. I don't want this video to be too long though, so I encourage you to go get Extreme for yourself. Again, it is free, and give it a try. Throw anything you want in there. It actually sounds really cool on drums and vocals as well. Okay, well, that's my video on spectral synthesis and Xtreme from Steinberg. I will put a link to the software and to my transcript and sources in the video description in case you want to read through this again. I would love to give a very big shout out to my patrons. This video took a long time to research and to animate and get all the resources together. I think I started it while I was at Super Booth this year, and I'm just now getting it out. Without your support, I would not be able to do videos like this, so thank you so much for making that possible. So with that said, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. My name is Jeremy, this is Red Means Recording, and I hope you have a wonderful day.